Hi, I'm Haley B. Miller, and this is Ohio Politics Explained, a podcast where you give us 15 minutes and we give you all the news you need to sound smart and impress your friends. Welcome back to Ohio Politics Explained, and happy 2025, dear gentle listeners. We're already off to an interesting year, from a new legislature to 2026 campaign announcements. Joining me to kick off the new year is Jesse Balmer.
Happy 2025. It's almost like we have a whole new political cycle already.
Yeah, and speaking of that, let's catch up on that pesky Senate appointment we still don't have the name of. Any day now, Governor Mike DeWine will appoint someone to replace Vice President-elect J.D. Vance in the Senate. Vance will be inaugurated with President-elect Donald Trump on January 20th, so really, any day now. As you all know, a lot of names have been tossed around since Trump and Vance won the November election, but we seem to have a pretty clear frontrunner at this point, Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted. How did we get here?
Yeah, so Jon Husted is a person that Mike DeWine knows very well. They've obviously been on the same ticket for quite some time. And Jon Husted, the thought was that he was going to run for governor after Mike DeWine is done, term limited at the end of 2026. But this is a surprising opportunity that has come forward. And so seems like it could be his if he wants it. And then the question is, does he want it? Which one of these very prime spots does he want to, take a stab at?
Yeah, and we talked to some sources about this recently who said that this is not necessarily an easy decision for Husted. He's had his sights set on the governor's race for a while now, and at the beginning of this, at least from my point of view, I figured that's where he was going to continue to focus his energy, but it sounds like maybe there are different calculations being made, but like one source told us he's never really been a DC guy. He's always been interested in Ohio and Ohio positions. I mean, is there something going on with the governor's race that you think may have changed his mind?
Yeah, so the Republican side to replace Mike DeWine is really fascinating. You have Jon Husted, who was obviously considering or actively maybe still considering a run for governor. You have Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost, who released a video of him standing outside the governor's office. So I think that's a pretty good indication he's interested. You have Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a Trump appointee to this new DOJ Government Accountability Office, but also someone who ran for president and then really was very supportive of Donald Trump. So he's someone who talks about how he likes being an executive and sees himself in that kind of a role. You have the Ohio Treasurer, Robert Sprague, who is making some considerations on that as well. And that's not even to say who might come out of the woodwork. And this is more than 2 years out.
Yeah, and I think, even though in a lot of ways Husted probably would have a good chance in a Republican primary, he has already been raising money, but it's a lot of money. It's going to be a bloody primary, and especially if someone like Ramaswamy gets in, the question becomes, does Trump endorse him over someone like Husted? And we've all seen what a Trump endorsement can do for Ohio elections. So whereas the Senate seat, it's just kind of his if, he tells the governor as much.
Yeah, I think where Trump is and who Trump would support for either the Senate or the Ohio governor's seat is a really fascinating question. Others have reported that Husted and DeWine went down to Mar-a-Lago to have a chat with the president-elect. No one let me in the Florida hotel, so I can't tell you exactly what was said there, but that's at least an interesting indication.
And speaking of 2026, we have our first Democrat in the race to replace DeWine. Dr. Amy Acton, who previously led the Ohio Department of Health, filed paperwork this week to launch her campaign. Most Ohioans either love or hate Acton from the COVID-19 pandemic, when she advocated for school and business closures to slow the spread of the virus. But Acton was the target of a lot of frustration, even threats, and she ultimately resigned. Jesse, you talked to her earlier this week. Why does she think it's time to get back in the public eye?
Yeah, so Acton talked about how she didn't want to, kind of turn a blind eye or turn her back to some of the problems that Ohioans are facing, whether that be access to healthcare, access to childcare, access to, just the ability to live a good life here in Ohio. And so I think that's one of her platforms. But like you said, she was a pretty polarizing figure during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think a lot of the policies that she advocated for to keep people from getting sick also had consequences like pretty massive unemployment and schools with, students still kind of regaining the skills that they might have lost when they were either not taking classes or taking classes online. And so that was kind of a balance everyone was trying to decide across the nation, but she really became the face of that decision in the state of Ohio.
Is she the Democrats' best shot to getting the governor's mansion? The only shot? I know some names are out there, but as we've talked about before, Democrats do not have a massive bench in Ohio.
Yeah, Democrats are in a rough spot. They've not won the governor's seat since 2006, and obviously 2024 was a rough year for them with Donald Trump winning the state by more than 11 percentage points, longtime Senator Sherrod Brown losing out. I think you can take from some of the people who are behind this Acton bid, who are also big Sherrod Brown supporters, that I don't think Amy Acton would have been getting into this race if Sherrod Brown was also getting into this race. So his political future is still kind of up in the air. But there are other names, people like House Minority Leader Allison Russo, who has been kind of the Democrats' main, pushback against Republican policies in the state house, but also not a super well-known name. So Acton, unless LeBron James wants to take the call, might be one of the better known Democrats in the state.
Yeah, and I feel like I would rather be an NBA player than governor of Ohio, but
it'd be a bit of a pay cut.
Our third topic today is the new Ohio legislature. Lawmakers convened this week to kick off the 136th General Assembly and choose new leaders for the next 2 years. For once, those votes were totally uneventful. Former Senate President Matt Huffman became the new House Speaker, and Senator Rob McCauley took over his mantle in the Senate. Remind us why it's so interesting that this was so boring.
Yeah, I think the speaker's race in particular has been messy the past, decade, I would say. We've had two former speakers that were under investigations by the FBI, one of which was convicted 20 years in federal prison for a pay-to-play scandal. The other one ultimately was never charged, but there was a lot of dust around that. We've had two different House speakers that won with support from Democrats. So that was very controversial and really led to a lot of infighting within the caucus, within the Republican caucus the last time around. And so really the fact that Matt Huffman solidified the votes from House Republicans back in an internal vote in November and that nothing changed between then and January is impressive in and of itself. The Senate has been a little bit more chill. They've generally picked their leaders and stuck with them. So Rob McCauley was not a massive surprise.
Yeah, and I know when Huffman won that internal vote back in November, those of us who were around for the Stevens-Marin debacle were like, well, Matt Huffman's probably going to be the House Speaker, but who knows?
Right. There's been enough. There's just like a lot of members in the House of Representatives. So there's going to be 65 Republicans in the House. And that's a lot of people to try to like keep all rowing in the same direction. So it was extraordinary in how ordinary and not that interesting it was. So we'll take it.
We've gotten some hints about what the Huffman-McCauley administration could look like. They've talked about rolling back some of the rules in Ohio's recreational marijuana program. They're both big fans of school vouchers, so we could see some more legislating there. Is there anything else that you're going to be watching from a seemingly more unified Republican caucus?
Yeah, so now Speaker Matt Huffman talked about how this school funding rollout that was really supposed to be done over 6 years, he says that that's unsustainable for the next 2-year cycle and wants to take a look at it. And I think that gave some pause to supporters of K-12 education. So we'll see what that ultimately ends up being. Both of them, both Senate President McCauley and Speaker Huffman, have talked about some sort of energy plan or energy overhaul. And so for some of us, that, harkens back to House Bill 6, but might be completely unrelated. So we'll see what comes out of that. But like you said, vouchers, marijuana, there's going to be a lot that these two are going to tackle together.
Let's wrap up today with the unfinished business of last session. DeWine signed a bunch of bills from lame duck this week, including a controversial education bill that critics say will harm LGBTQ students. House Bill 8 requires schools to inform parents about any, quote, sexually explicit learning material, which parents can then opt their kids out of. It also requires districts to allow students to leave for religious instruction during the school day if they choose. What else became law during DeWine's marathon signing day?
Yeah, he was in there on Wednesday and they just kept calling out bills and people would file in and get their pens for having it signed. So it was quite busy, I would say. House Bill 8, obviously, you talked a lot about. There is a bill on license suspension. So it makes it harder to suspend licenses for kind of non-driving issues. It makes it easier to get them back. There's this Braden's law, which releases some restrictions on sexual extortion. So if someone takes pictures of you and wants to try to get money off of that or basically blackmail you with those images, that was named for a teen who died by suicide after that happened. And so there's things about Pay Stub Protection Act, which passed, saying that you have to get information about your earnings and deductions for every statement. Firearm liability insurance, cities can't require you to have that. So a bunch of namings of roads and license plates. I believe you can soon buy the Dolly Parton license plate. So
good.
Plenty to do.
Ohio Politics Explained is brought to you by the USA Today Network Ohio Bureau. You can check us out on X, formerly known as Twitter, @Ohio Explained.